8 years. That is the distance between the first frame of Adventure Time, which aired on Cartoon Network on April 5th, 2010, and the last frame of the series finale, Come Along With Me, which aired on September 3rd, 2018. 283 episodes, 10 seasons. A boy who started the show small enough to ride on his dog and ended the show with a beard, a cybernetic arm, a kingdom in his peripheral vision, and a quiet, complicated kind of peace that the show had earned the right to give him. And then, almost 2 years after that final shot, the screen lit up again. June 25th, 2020, a small green machine in a dying space station, alone, singing to himself in the dark. November 19th, 2020, 2 women in glass armor, older now, walking back into the kingdom they had left behind. May 20th, 2021, an old man with a sword across his lap, his dog beside him on the porch, watching a sunset that has been waiting for them their entire lives. September 2nd, 2021. A peppermint candy in a wizard school uniform and a fully human Simon Petrikov standing at the front of a classroom, holding a relic in his hand and explaining where it came from. 4 specials, 16 months. The closing argument of a show that had already ended once. Adventure Time, Distant Lands, is what happens when a story is brave enough to come back, not to extend itself, but to look at itself again from the other side of time, to check on the people it left in Ooo, to ask the question every long-running show eventually has to answer. The question every long-running show usually answers in a montage and a wedding and a faded photograph. Distant Lands answers it differently. Distant Lands answers it by splitting the question across 4 different worlds, 4 different tones, 4 different moods, and refusing to let any single one of them carry the whole weight. The question is what happens to these characters when the adventure ends. The answer the show gives across those 4 specials is that the adventure was never the point. The bonds were always the point, and time is the only enemy these characters were ever really fighting. Welcome to Tome. Get comfortable. This one goes long. Let us get into it. The first thing to understand about Distant Lands is what it refused to do. There is a version of this project that almost certainly existed in a pitch deck somewhere, a version where Adventure Time comes back for a single feature-length special, gathers the entire cast in one room, gives every character a final beat, and ties the bow on a story that the original finale had already mostly tied. That version would have been easier to produce. It would have been easier to market. It would have been easier to hand to the audience as a single self-contained gift. And it is not what Adam Muto and his team made. What they made instead was 4 separate specials, each running roughly 45 minutes, each focused on a different character or pair of characters, each set in a tonally distinct world that does not visually or emotionally resemble the others. BMO opens in deep space, on a dying station orbiting a desert planet, and never once shows the land of Ooo. Obsidian returns to Ooo, but to a glass kingdom that the original series only briefly hinted at, and centers 2 adult women working through unfinished business. Together Again is set almost entirely in the afterlife, in something the show calls the Dead Worlds, a layered cosmology of post-mortal realms that the main series only touched on in fragments. Wizard City is set inside a single school in a single city, and its protagonist is Peppermint Butler, who in the original series was at most a recurring side character. No 2 of these specials share a setting. No 2 of them share a protagonist. No 2 of them share a tone. That is not an accident. That is a thesis statement. The thesis is that Ooo, after the credits rolled on Come Along With Me, did not contract back into a single story. It fanned out. It spread. The characters scattered into the lives the show had spent 10 seasons earning for them. And the only honest way to look at where they ended up was to look at 4 different places at once. Except that the camera cannot be in all of them, and pick 4 windows, 4 worlds. The show is telling you something with that structure that none of the dialogue ever has to say out loud. The story does not converge anymore. The story is everywhere. And the camera, the show, the narrator you have been listening to for 8 years, is not going to pretend otherwise. Think about what that means. The decision to fragment Distant Lands into 4 separate specials is the strongest possible argument that the adventure has actually ended. There is no longer a fin-shaped center for everything to orbit around. There is no longer a single land of Ooo with a single hero questing through it. There are scattered lives, and the only way to see them is to take them one at a time. The show makes this choice quietly. It does not announce it. It does not say in any character's voice that the world has decentralized. It just gives you BMO in space and trusts you to notice that this is not a Finn story anymore. It gives you Marceline and Princess Bubblegum standing in a kingdom of glass that Finn does not appear in, and trusts you to notice that this is not a Jake story anymore. It gives you Finn and Jake in death in a place where Princess Bubblegum cannot follow, and trusts you to notice that the deaths are the point. It gives you Simon teaching a class, and trusts you to notice that nobody from the old crew is in the room with him. The show is not being subtle about what it is doing here. The show is showing you that the unit, the 4-pack, the band that the original series sometimes pretended would always be together, has actually dispersed, the way real friend groups disperse, the way real lives do. And the show is asking you to sit with that, to let it be true. The closure is not a reunion. The closure is the acceptance that there will not be a reunion. Distant Lands is the most expensive, most carefully animated, most lovingly produced argument any animated show has ever made for the unglamorous truth that adult lives drift apart. And it is also, simultaneously, the most expensive argument that drifting apart is not the same as forgetting. Those two statements have to be held together. The show is going to spend 4 specials demonstrating both of them at once. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The chronologically latest of the 4 specials is BMO, which is also the one released first, which is the kind of structural decision that probably deserves a footnote of its own. BMO aired on June 25th, 2020, the opening salvo of the Distant Lands project, and the choice to lead with BMO rather than with any of the human or human-adjacent leads is itself a statement about what the show wants you to feel as you re-enter this world. BMO is set in deep space, on a space station called the Drift, far enough into the future that no specific year is ever attached to it. The viewer is given the smallest of small machines, the green and yellow gaming console with a face, alone in a cosmos so large that the land of Ooo never even appears. There is something almost cruel about that opening choice, and something also almost merciful about it. Cruel because the audience has just spent a decade attached to specific places: the Tree Fort, the Candy Kingdom, the Ice King's Mountain, and the first thing the show does on its return is take the audience away from all of them. Merciful because by removing the familiar, the show makes it impossible to fall back on nostalgia. You cannot mourn the Tree Fort if you are not looking at the Tree Fort. You have to deal with what is in front of you. What is in front of you is BMO, alone on a hostile station, a dying machine kingdom, and a young space rabbit named Y5, who has spent her whole life in the dark. The plot of BMO, in flat description, runs as follows. The space station orbits a planet called the Drift Empire and is in the late stages of decay. Its monarchy is hollow, its protocols are broken, and a creature called Hugo, a giant alien ruler with a soft voice and a quiet menace, is running the place into the ground while pretending to govern it. BMO crash, lands on the station, falls in with Y5, the bright-eyed rabbit child whose mother has gone missing, and over the course of the special performs the BMO-iest possible heroism, which is to say, BMO defeats a tyrant by being too sincere, too small, and too literal to be defeated. There is a scene near the end where BMO is asked, plainly, who BMO is, and BMO says something to the effect of being whatever is needed in the moment. A friend, a hero, a queen, a doctor, a child. The show frames this as comedy. It is also, structurally, the thesis of the special. BMO is the only one of the original cast who can survive in a world this far from Ooo, because BMO does not need a fixed identity to function. BMO can be anything, and so wherever BMO goes, BMO is at home. None of the others can do that. Finn is a hero, specifically because of who he is in relation to Ooo. Jake is a brother, specifically because of who he is in relation to Finn. Princess Bubblegum is a ruler, specifically because of who she is in relation to a kingdom. Marceline is a vampire queen, specifically because of who she is in relation to a long history. Take any of them out of context, and the show would have to invent new context for them. BMO needs no context. BMO arrives, and the context forms around BMO. There is a moment in BMO that most viewers remember as a sweet science fiction beat, and then move past, where BMO and Y5 are standing in the engine room of the station, looking at the broken core of the place, and BMO says, essentially, that BMO is going to fix it. Y5 asks, fairly how? BMO says, with the kind of total confidence that only BMO can deliver, that BMO simply will. The show is not making fun of BMO in this moment. The show is showing you something the show has been showing you for 10 seasons, and that the original series sometimes treated as a joke. BMO's optimism is not naivete. BMO's optimism is a kind of moral position. BMO believes that things can be fixed, because BMO is willing to try. Most of the rest of the cast believes things can be fixed only after enough trauma has been processed. BMO skips the processing. BMO goes straight to the trying. And in BMO, the special, that approach is given an entire 45-minute world to operate in. And it works. Hugo is defeated. The station is saved. Y5 finds her mother. The credits roll on a tone of quiet, hard-earned cosmic peace. And the audience, if they are paying attention, has just been shown the longest-term version of what the show has been about all along. The thing the show calls heroism is, underneath, the willingness to keep showing up. BMO shows up on a space station that BMO has no business being on. And that act alone is enough to bend the special toward a happy ending. The reason this matters for the larger Distant Lands project is that BMO is the special set furthest in the future. By foregrounding BMO first, the show is telling the audience that the future of OO, the future of the Adventure Time universe, is not a future where the original cast of friends is still adventuring together. It is a future where they have scattered, and where the smallest, strangest, most adaptive of them is the one who carries the spark of the original adventure into entirely new contexts. That is not a small reframe. That is the show telling you that BMO, the comic relief gaming console, was the one all along whose form of love was most portable. BMO can love anyone. BMO has loved everyone. And BMO, in the long run, is going to keep loving people in places the rest of the cast will never see. There is a way to read BMO as a self-contained science fiction adventure, a charming standalone in a beloved universe. And that reading is fine. It is also incomplete. BMO is positioned where it is positioned in the Distant Lands release order on purpose. Releasing BMO first does two things at once. It severs the audience's expectation that this project is going to be a tidy reunion, and it sets up Obsidian, the second special, to land harder by contrast. After BMO, after the cosmic loneliness of a space station and the soft ending where a small machine waves goodbye to a child it has just saved, the audience is primed to come back to OO and find the people it left there. That is what Obsidian gives you, and the way Obsidian gives it to you is one of the most carefully calibrated emotional landings in the entire Adventure Time corpus. Obsidian aired on November 19th, 2020. 5 months after BMO. It is the special most fans had been openly waiting for since the final scene of Come Along With Me, in which Princess Bubblegum and Marceline shared a kiss that the original series had spent the better part of a decade hinting at without ever quite confirming. The kiss happened, the credits rolled, and the audience was left with two questions. The first was whether what they had just seen was an ending or a beginning. The second was whether the show would ever come back to these two and tell the audience which one it was. Obsidian is the answer. Obsidian is set, the special tells you, a few years after the events of Come Along With Me. The exact in-world year count is left vague, and that vagueness is itself a craft choice. The show does not want you counting on a calendar. The show wants you in a softer relationship to the time that has passed. Marceline and Princess Bubblegum live together now. They wake up in the same bed. They share a morning. The Candy Kingdom appears to be running smoothly enough that Princess Bubblegum can take a long trip without the place collapsing. The opening of the special is, by Adventure Time standards, almost shockingly domestic. Two women, one of them a 1,000-year-old vampire queen, the other an immortal candy ruler, doing the small, ordinary things that two people who live together do. Brushing teeth, making breakfast, discussing logistics, Marceline picking up her axe base to go work on a song. The show is establishing, quietly and without fuss, that the relationship the audience watched the show flirt with for years is, in distant lands, simply the new baseline. They are together, they are partners. The show treats this as no longer the question. The show treats this as the floor. From that floor, Obsidian builds its actual story, which is not about whether they are together, but about whether they have actually worked through any of the things that almost broke them apart. Marceline is invited back to the Glass Kingdom, a place she helped found, a place that holds memories of her younger, harder, more violent self. Princess Bubblegum goes with her. The two of them encounter Glass Boy, a young glass-skinned child who has read the song Marceline once wrote about a dragon and who needs Marceline's help. Through the special, in a series of flashbacks, the show fills in the history that the main series never directly showed. Marceline and Bubblegum had a relationship before the events of Come Along With Me. That relationship ended badly. There was an unfinished song. There were words said that were not taken back. And the present-day storyline, with its calm domesticity, is sitting on top of an older argument that neither of them had ever fully addressed. The plain statement of the special's structure is this: a 1,000-year-old vampire and an immortal candy princess have moved in together without resolving the breakup that happened decades earlier, and the special is going to make them resolve it now. Stated that flatly, the premise is almost funny. Stated with the patience the show actually gives it, the premise is devastating, because the show is not pretending that being in love fixes everything. The show is not pretending that two people choosing to be together is the end of the story. The show is acknowledging, in the careful pacing of Obsidian, that the real work begins after the kiss, not before it, and it lets the work be visible. There is a song called Monster, which Marceline performs in the special's climax, and in which she names, plainly, the way she has thought of herself, the thing she has been afraid of becoming, and the thing she does not want Princess Bubblegum to see. The lyrics are not vague. The performance is not hidden behind a comic distancing. Marceline stands in front of Princess Bubblegum and says, essentially, that she has spent years afraid that she is the monster the dragon song was about, and that her fear of being that monster is the reason she has held people at arm's length for centuries. Princess Bubblegum hears it. The show does not cut away. The show does not undercut the moment with a joke. The show lets the song land, lets Princess Bubblegum stand in the moment of hearing it, and then lets the two of them choose, on screen, to keep going. There is a final song, sometimes referred to as the woke-up devotion ballad, sometimes called other things by fans, in which Princess Bubblegum sings back her own commitment, plainly, in a voice that sounds nothing like the cheerful candy ruler the show originally introduced. The show is not being subtle about what it is doing here. The show is letting these two adult characters, in front of the audience, say to each other the things the original series only ever implied, and then the show lets them be together, not in the giddy, will they or will they not sense the original series sometimes used, in the long, patient, post-question sense of two people who have made it past the question and are now living inside the answer. That is a very different relationship than the one the audience had been passing for years. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. The implication of Obsidian is not that Marceline and Princess Bubblegum are romantic. The implication of Obsidian is that they were always going to have to do this work, and that being romantic was only ever the beginning of it. The show does not call them married. The show does not give them a wedding. The show is not interested in that ceremony. The show is interested in the thing under the ceremony, the chosen continuation, the daily reaffirmation, the song that gets sung when one person is afraid of being a monster and the other person stays in the room while it gets sung. That is the love story Obsidian commits to. It is not a fairy tale. It is a long, deliberate, sometimes painful adult relationship, given the dignity of being depicted as such. There is a moment in Obsidian that most viewers remember as a flashback and then move past. where younger Marceline and younger Princess Bubblegum are standing in a half-finished version of The Glass Kingdom, arguing about something the show does not let you fully hear. The show does not give you the words. The show does not tell you who is right. The show just gives you the body language and the silence afterward. Both of them turn away. Both of them leave. And the next time the show shows you The Glass Kingdom, in the present day, it is decades later, and they are walking back into it together. That gap, that off-screen distance between the argument and the return, is the entire meaning of Obsidian. The show is showing you what was lost in that gap and what survived it. Most relationships do not survive a gap that long. Most arguments calcify into a permanent silence. The show is asking you to think about what kind of love would actually outlast a centuries-long pause. The answer the show gives is not that their love is unique or magical or fated. The answer is plainer than that. The answer is that one of them, eventually, was willing to come back. Coming back is the work. There is a specific kind of relational courage that comes from going back into a place you ruined years ago, with the person you ruined it with, and trying again. Obsidian is built around that act. Marceline does not go back to the Glass Kingdom because the Glass Kingdom needs her, although it does. Marceline goes back because Princess Bubblegum is willing to walk into it with her, because Glass Boy reminds her of who she was when she wrote the Dragon Song, and because the version of herself she has been running from is a version she cannot fix without facing. Princess Bubblegum, for her part, is not going to the Glass Kingdom out of a sense of duty. She is going because Marceline is going. The dynamic in the present-day scenes of Obsidian is a small, specific kind of intimacy that the original series rarely had room to depict. It is the intimacy of two people who have already had the big fight, already weathered the big absence, and are now in the long, quiet phase of choosing each other in small ways. Princess Bubblegum carries Marceline's bag. Marceline lets Princess Bubblegum take charge of logistics. They make jokes that only they understand. They sit in silences that do not need to be broken. None of this is announced as romantic. The show does not light it up with hearts. The show simply lets it be what it is. Two people who, after a long detour, have settled into the kind of relationship that the audience does not see in many animated shows, especially not in animated shows that were originally pitched as boy and his dog adventure cartoons. That, on its own, would be enough to make Obsidian historically significant. The show did something that no major American animated show had done before, in giving two female leads, both queer, both immortal or near immortal, a 45-minute special centered on the long emotional work of their adult relationship, and treating that work as serious enough to carry the whole runtime. But the special is doing something even larger than that representational achievement. The special is telling you that this kind of love, this kind of slow, patient, relational repair, is the form of victory the show actually believes in. The show has spent 10 seasons watching its leads defeat lichs, demons, devils, kingdoms, and conceptual horrors. The show has, by the end of Come Along With Me, defeated the literal embodiment of chaos. And then, in Obsidian, the show pivots and says, very quietly, that the bigger and harder victory is two people staying together long enough to actually hear each other's monsters. There is a thesis in that pivot. The thesis is that the show was always more interested in the small victories than the big ones, and that the big ones, the monster fights and kingdom saving, were always just framing for the small ones. Obsidian is the special that confirms it. Obsidian is the special that says, plainly, the love story was always the real story, and the love story is not over because the kiss happened. The love story is just beginning, and the show is going to spend a decade equivalent of in-world time letting it begin. Before we move on, if you are enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. If BMO is the special set furthest in the future, and Obsidian is the special set closest to the events of Come Along With Me, then Together Again is the special that ignores the question of when entirely, and instead asks the question of whether time has any meaning at all once the people you love are gone. Together Again aired on May 20th, 2021. It is, by almost any measure, the most emotionally extreme of the four specials. It is the one fans warned each other about. It is the one with the highest density of moments that fans describe as the moment they had to pause the screen and look at the ceiling for a minute. The premise of Together Again in the flattest possible language is this: Finn dies of natural causes as an old man. Then Jake dies. The two of them meet again in the Dead Worlds, which is the show's name for its layered afterlife cosmology, and they go on one last adventure together, traveling through a sequence of post-mortal realms, in search of each other, in search of meaning, in search of a way out. They eventually encounter an entity called New Death, who is revealed in one of the most quietly ominous reveals the show has ever done, to be a body possessed by the Lich, the show's original and persistent ultimate antagonist. Finn and Jake confront the Lich one final time in a place where their physical bodies are already gone. They survive the encounter through a combination of friendship, resolve, and a willingness to let go. And the special ends with the two of them choosing reincarnation together, agreeing to be reborn, to lose their memories, to find each other again in some new shape, in some new world. Because the alternative, eternity in a static afterlife, is not a thing they can stomach. They were always going to choose to keep going. The whole arc of their friendship has been a refusal to stand still. The special ends on the implication that they have been reborn, that they will find each other again, that the friendship is not subject to death in any final way. That is the surface plot. The actual content of Together Again is something stranger and more painful than the plot summary suggests. The show is doing something here that very few American animated shows ever do. The show is depicting old age and natural death of its protagonist in unflinching terms. Finn is old. Finn is white-haired. Finn has lived a long life off-screen, the details of which the show only sparingly gestures at. Jake has been dead for some time before Finn arrives in the Dead Worlds. The reunion in the afterlife is not a triumphant moment. It is quiet, hesitant, and slightly stunned, the way real reunions sometimes are. Two old friends who loved each other intensely as children, who grew apart in the way that even close brothers grow apart, finding each other again in a place neither of them was sure existed, and trying, in their first scenes together, to figure out how to talk to each other again. That is not the kind of beat a children's cartoon usually attempts. The fact that Adventure Time attempts it and lands it is part of why Together Again is as discussed as it is. Think about what that actually means. The show is asking the audience to sit with the fact that even Finn and Jake, the most iconic best friend pairing in modern animation, the brother bond that defined a decade of children's television, eventually grew up and grew slightly apart. The special does not flinch from that. There are scenes early in Together Again where the two of them are visibly out of practice with each other, where they almost talk past one another, where the easy rhythm of their banter takes a few beats to find again. The show is being honest. Decades of separation, even between people who love each other deeply, leave a mark. The Dead Worlds version of Finn is not the boy from Season 1. The Dead Worlds version of Jake is not the irreverent, stretchy dog from Season 3. They are both versions of themselves, who have lived through everything that comes after a life of adventure, including the ordinary disappointments and the long stretches of distance. And only after they have spent some time together again do they slowly, gradually return to something resembling the rhythm they used to have. That is the most adult thing the show has ever depicted. The reconnection is not automatic. The reconnection is work, even between brothers, even after death. The Dead Worlds, as a setting, is one of the most ambitious world-building flourishes in any of the 4 specials. The afterlife in Adventure Time is not a single place. It is a series of layered realms, each with its own ruler, its own atmosphere, its own logic, and the dead pass through them like travelers, passing through countries. Finn and Jake travel through several of these realms across the special, and each one functions as a small thematic vignette about a different aspect of letting go. There is a realm of regret. There is a realm of refusal. There is a realm where the dead are stuck performing the same actions over and over because they cannot accept that their lives have ended. The show stages each of these as visual set pieces, each one beautiful, each one slightly off, each one populated by characters from the long history of the series who the audience may or may not remember. The cumulative effect is that of a tour. Death in Adventure Time is not a single door. Death is a hallway with many doors, and the choice of which door to walk through, the choice of how to be dead, is itself a final act of character. Finn and Jake, when they finally reach the throne room of New Death, are not the only travelers in the dead worlds. There are others, there are old friends, there are people the show wanted to nod to. There are also strangers. The show resists the urge to make the afterlife into a pure fan service reunion. It includes some, but it makes the inclusions feel earned rather than lazy. And the central confrontation, when it finally arrives, is staged with the kind of theatrical restraint that the show has rarely allowed itself. New Death is sitting on a throne. New Death is calm. New Death is, on the surface, a perfectly reasonable bureaucratic figure who appears to be running the afterlife smoothly. The reveal that the Lich is in there, behind the eyes, animating the entire arrangement, is delivered without fanfare. The show has been telling you for a decade who the Lich is. The Lich is the show's stand-in for cosmic emptiness, for the desire to undo all life, for the part of the universe that wants there to be nothing. That entity has been the show's most persistent threat, and the show, in Together Again, is using its return to the screen to make one last point about it. The Lich is not gone. The Lich does not stay defeated. The Lich keeps coming back in new shapes, with new offices, with new names, because the impulse the Lich represents is one of the constants of any universe. The light of the show, the friendships and bonds and small kindnesses do not eliminate the Lich. They hold the line against the Lich. There is a difference. The show is not telling you, in Together Again, that good triumphs over evil in any final way. The show is telling you that the only victory available to mortal creatures is the choice to keep going, to keep loving, to keep showing up. Finn and Jake demonstrate that choice in the most literal possible terms. They reject the static peace New Death offers. They reject the idea that they should rest. They choose to be reborn. They choose to lose their memories and find each other in a new world. The show stages this choice as quiet and inevitable. There is no big argument. There is no monologue. There are two best friends standing together in the afterlife, looking at each other, agreeing without quite needing words that the answer is to keep going. The screen brightens. The two of them dissolve into something like light. And the implication is that somewhere, in some new shape, in some new place, two beings who do not yet know they used to be Finn and Jake are about to find each other again. That ending is the strongest argument the show has ever made for its own thesis. The thesis is that the friendship between Finn and Jake is not subject to time. The friendship is subject to forms, to shapes, to bodies, to lives. The forms end. The friendship does not. The form was always temporary. The bond was always the durable thing. And the show is willing to depict the bond surviving even the death of the bodies that originally carried it. There is something almost theological about that ending. The show is not religious in any specific sense. The show does not endorse any particular afterlife, but the show is, in Together Again, making a metaphysical claim about the nature of love. And the claim is that love, as the show defines it, is the thing that does not stop when the body stops. That is a heavy statement for a children's cartoon to make. The fact that the show makes it without ever quite saying it out loud. The fact that it lets the visual imagery and the structural choices carry the weight is part of why Together Again is the special that has the most lasting emotional impact for many fans. The special does not preach. The special demonstrates. It demonstrates that even after everything ends, the two of them choose each other again, and the choice is the meaning. There is a scene late in Together Again that most viewers remember as a quiet beat and then move past, where Finn and Jake are sitting on the porch of an idealized version of the tree fort that exists somewhere in the dead worlds, looking out over a sunset that does not match any sunset from the original series. They are not talking. They are not adventuring, they are just sitting there. The show holds on the image for longer than it strictly needs to. There is no music doing the emotional work for you. There is no dialogue telling you what they are feeling. There is just two old friends in two very old bodies watching a sunset together. The show does not comment on what is happening. The show does not announce that this is the last time they will sit on this porch in these forms. The show simply lets the moment exist and trusts the audience to feel the weight. That kind of trust is rare in animation. Most shows faced with a moment that emotionally heavy, would not be able to resist scoring it, narrating it, or having one character say something profound. Adventure Time, in that scene, says nothing. The silence is the meaning. The silence is the show's way of telling you that some things are too important to wrap in dialogue. Finn and Jake do not need to talk to know what they are looking at. They are looking at the end of one life and the beginning of another, and they are doing it together, and that is enough. The show has been preparing you, slowly, across the entire run of the original series, to be able to read that scene. Every silence between Finn and Jake, every moment in the original series where the two of them sat together without needing to speak, every campfire and every long ride and every quiet pause has been training the audience to understand what this kind of silence between them means. By the time you reach the Dead World's porch, the silence is fluent. The silence speaks every word that needs to be said, and several that do not. That is craft. That is what it looks like when a show invests, over hundreds of episodes, in the relationship between two characters, such that, at the end, it can rely on a wordless image to carry the entire emotional load of a finale. The decision to do it again, after the original series had already ended, is the show telling you that it is confident in what it built. The show knows that the friendship can hold the weight. So it puts the weight on the friendship, and the friendship holds. The reincarnation ending of Together Again is sometimes interpreted by fans as a cycle, a metaphysical loop in which Finn and Jake are doomed, or destined to find each other in every possible life. The show is not particularly committed to that reading. The show is committed to a softer claim. The claim is that the bond between them is the kind of bond that, given any chance, will reform itself, not because of magic, not because of fate, because that is what bonds like that do. They re-find each other when the geometry of the universe gives them an opportunity. The show ends Together Again on the implication of an opportunity given. Two new beings, two new forms, two old souls, in shapes neither of them recognize yet, somewhere in a new world. The audience does not get to see the reunion. The audience only gets the implication that it will happen. That implication is in some ways more powerful than seeing the reunion would be, because the show is asking the audience to trust it, to trust the bond, to trust that wherever those two souls end up, they will find each other again, even if the show is no longer there to film it. The show is, in that final beat, handing the audience the keys to the universe and saying, you carry this from here. You believe what you have been shown. You hold the friendship in your head, and you trust that it continues. That is one of the boldest things a long-running show can do at its end. The show is closing not on resolution, but on the trust between the show and the audience that the resolution would happen if there were more time. There is no more time. The show ends, the two of them dissolve, and the audience is left holding the bond. Before we move on, if you are enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The fourth and last special, Wizard City, aired on September 2nd, 2021, and is the one that most fans describe as the smallest of the four. That is true on the level of stakes. Wizard City is not about the cosmos. It is not about death. It is not about the long history of a centuries-old relationship. Wizard City is about a Candy in a school uniform trying to figure out what kind of wizard he is going to be. And in another show, in another series, that smallness would be a problem. In the Distant Lands project, the smallness is the point. After BMO, after Obsidian, after Together Again, after the Cosmos, after the Glass Kingdom, after the Dead Worlds, the show comes back, finally, to a single classroom in a single city and tells you a story about an ordinary student trying to find his footing. The show is doing this on purpose. The show is telling you that even in a universe where there is space and death and immortal love, there is also school. There is also the small daily question of who you are going to be when nobody is watching. There is also Peppermint Butler, sitting at a desk, opening a book. The protagonist of Wizard City is Peppermint Butler, who in the original series was the Candy Kingdom's small, slightly sinister, occasionally demonic-adjacent castle servant. The show in the original series treated Peppermint Butler as comic relief, with a dark undertow, a Candy with strange friends, a butler who did inappropriate things in the basement of the castle. Wizard City takes that character, who in the main series rarely got more than a few lines per episode, and gives him an entire 45-minute special. The show is making an argument about what kind of character matters. The argument is that a side character who has been quietly accumulating depth across 10 seasons is eventually worth a leading role. The plot of Wizard City is, on its face, a school story. Peppermint Butler enrolls at the wizard school called Wiz Arts, which sits inside Wizard City, which is the city of magic users that the original series visited several times. He is an outsider. He has unusual knowledge for a beginner. He has a past that he does not entirely want to discuss. He gets assigned a roommate who does not initially like him. He encounters teachers, including one teacher who recognizes him in a way that suggests something is going on under the surface. There are tests, there are practical magic exams, there are minor antagonists, there is a low-stakes mystery in the background, which builds slowly across the special, and which eventually reveals that something larger and stranger about Peppermint Butler's identity has been quietly setting itself up for him to confront. The show is content, for a long stretch of the runtime, to just be a school story. The show lets the small textures of school life carry the early sequences, class schedules, wand selection, the petty politics of who sits where in the cafeteria. The patient, almost slow nature of these scenes is part of the special's deliberate decision to slow the audience down after the cosmic intensity of Together Again. Wizard City is the show telling you that you can come down now, you can rest, you can sit in a classroom for a while. The most affecting element of Wizard City, for many viewers, is not the school plot. The most affecting element is the appearance of Simon Petrikov, fully restored to his human form, teaching at the school. Simon teaches a class on the history of magical artifacts. He stands at the front of a small classroom. He holds objects in his hand. He explains where they came from, what they did, how they were used. He is, in every visible respect, the man he was before the crown. The show holds on this image with what feels like deep deliberateness. Simon, in the original series, was one of the most heartbreaking characters on television. The Ice King was a comic figure for years before the show revealed, in episodes like I Remember You, which is Season 4, Episode 25, and Simon and Marcy, which is Season 5, Episode 14, that he was a man named Simon Petrikov, who had been slowly erased by the cursed crown that kept him alive. The crown saved him from the apocalypse. The crown destroyed who he was. The crown made him Ice King. And one of the central tragedies of the original series was that the Simon underneath the Ice King, the kind, scholarly, gentle man who had once raised a small vampire girl named Marceline, was largely inaccessible. He surfaced in flashbacks. He surfaced in fragments. He surfaced in the brief moments when the crown's power waned, and the show treated his loss as one of its great unresolved griefs. Then Come Along With Me, the series finale, restored him. The crown was removed. The man came back. The audience saw him as himself again. And the original series, having earned that moment, ended shortly afterward, leaving the audience with the feeling of a wound that had been allowed to heal. Wizard City picks up that healed Simon and shows him going about a life. That in itself is a remarkable thing for the show to depict. Most shows that restore a long-suffering character to themselves end shortly after the restoration. The restoration is the climax. There is no after. Wizard City sits in the after. Simon is teaching. Simon is wearing reading glasses. Simon has notes. Simon has an office. Simon talks about the past with the calm of a person who has had time to make peace with it. He is not destroyed by what happened to him. He is also not pretending it did not happen. He is a man who lost a long stretch of his life and is now, with care, building a small, ordinary life on the other side of that loss. The show is showing you what recovery looks like. Recovery is not triumphant. Recovery is not a montage. Recovery is a man at a chalkboard explaining the provenance of a magical object to a class of bored students. There is a moment in Wizard City where Simon and Peppermint Butler interact, and the special handles their relationship with extraordinary tenderness. Simon recognizes something in the candy student. Simon is gentle with him. Simon is, the show suggests, a teacher in the truest sense, a person who pays attention to the students who need attention. And Peppermint Butler, who in the original series was associated with darker, weirder energies, is given the chance, in the safe space of Simon's classroom, to be just a student, to be young, to be uncertain, to be allowed to ask questions. The show has done something that very few stories about long-running characters ever do. The show has given two of its most damaged side figures, Simon and Peppermint Butler, a quiet life where their damage is no longer their identity. They get to be other things now. Simon gets to be a teacher. Peppermint Butler gets to be a student. Neither of them is defined, in this special, by the worst things that happen to them. That, on its own, is a kind of grace. There is a deeper analytical move embedded in Wizard City that takes a moment to surface. The choice to make Peppermint Butler the protagonist of the final special is, in retrospect, the show telling you something about who deserves the spotlight in the long view. The original series put Finn at the centre. The original series put Jake at the centre. Distant Lands does not put either of them at the centre of any of its specials, except partly in Together Again. Distant Lands gives lead roles to BMO, Marceline and Princess Bubblegum, Finn and Jake jointly, and Peppermint Butler. The pattern, when you look at it across all four specials, is that the show has decided the final word will not be spoken by the protagonists you expected. The final word will be spoken by the characters who were, in some sense, easy to overlook. BMO, the joke. Marceline and Princess Bubblegum, the romantic subplot. Finn and Jake, jointly, after they are dead. Peppermint Butler, the side gag. That distribution of attention is itself an argument. The argument is that long-running stories accumulate value in the corners as much as in the centre, and that an honest finale, a finale that reflects the actual texture of the world the show built, has to spend time in those corners. The centre will be fine. The centre has had its decade. It is the corners that need the space now. Wizard City spends its space on the corners, and by spending it there, the special completes the larger Distant Lands argument. The argument is that the world of Adventure Time is not a Finn story. The world of Adventure Time is a world story. The world is full of people, candies, machines, vampires, demons, students, teachers, ghosts, and gods. And each of them has a life that the show, given enough time, would tell honestly. The show was not given infinite time. The show got 4 specials. So the show picked 4 corners and went deep on each of them. The argument that this constitutes the right ending is, in part, the argument that endings are about coverage, not about closure. You cannot close a world this big. You can, however, show the audience that the world goes on in many directions. Wizard City is the special that does that most clearly, because Wizard City says, by simply existing, that there are more stories, there are more students at WizArts, there are more teachers like Simon, there are more candies like Peppermint Butler who have not yet found out who they are. The world keeps generating lives. The show is willing to look at one of those lives in detail and trust that the audience will extrapolate the rest. The fact that the show ends, formally, on Wizard City is one of the quieter craft choices of the entire project. Wizard City was the last of the 4 specials released on September 2nd, 2021, just one day shy of the 3rd anniversary of the original series finale. The show ends then, not with a bang or a tear or a death, but with a school day. The audience does not get a sweeping closing montage. The audience gets the implication that tomorrow there will be another class, there will be another assignment, there will be Simon at the front of the room, holding up another artifact. The show is closing on the most ordinary possible image, because the show has, by that point, earned the right to close on something ordinary. The audience has been through cosmic loneliness, deep relational repair, the death and reincarnation of 2 best friends, and now the audience is sitting in a classroom watching a candy take notes. There is something almost defiant about that ending. The show is saying plainly that the everyday is the point, the adventures were the framing. The classrooms and the kitchens and the porches and the libraries are the actual setting of the lives the audience cares about. And the show, on its way out, is going to land on one of those classrooms and let the lights fade there. That is a deeply unfashionable choice. Most modern animation, especially long-running modern animation, exits on a higher note. Most shows want a montage, a wedding, a battle, a coronation. Adventure Time has, in distant lands, gestured at all of those things across the 4 specials. Marceline and Princess Bubblegum have done their relational coronation. Finn and Jake have done their final battle in the afterlife. BMO has saved a station. And the actual last image the show ever produces, the actual final beat of the entire 10-year project including all extensions, is Peppermint Butler attending school. Some critics read that as anticlimactic. The reading the show seems to be inviting is that the small, ordinary, repeatable rhythms of life are the thing that the adventures were always protecting. You fight the Lich so that there can be a Wizards. You defeat the demons so that Simon can have an office, and notes, and a chalkboard. The big stories are in service of the small ones, not the other way around. That inversion, stated quietly through the structure of the 4 specials, is part of why Distant Lands feels different from most franchise extensions. It is not extending the spectacle. It is using the spectacle to land on a small kindness. There is a specific kind of restraint that comes from a show that has earned the right to do anything, choosing, instead, to do something small and right. Before we move on, if you are enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. There is a thread running through all 4 specials that is worth pulling on directly, because once you see it, it organizes the entire Distant Lands project around a single insight. The thread is the show's relationship with time. Adventure Time, as a series, has always been about time in a way that most cartoons are not. The premise of the original series is that the world of Ooo is the post-apocalyptic remnant of a previous human civilization. The trees are growing through the ruins of buildings. The mountains are cooled lava from a war that ended 1,000 years before the camera arrived. Finn is, for most of the series, the only known surviving human, although that gets complicated. The Ice King is a man from before the apocalypse, kept alive by a crown that stole his memory. Marceline is over 1,000 years old. Princess Bubblegum is older than she looks. Simon is older than he looks. The world the audience is watching is a world built on top of an older world, populated by characters who remember pieces of that older world, in a present that is constantly being haunted by a past nobody fully understands. Time in Adventure Time is not a backdrop. Time is a character. Time is the thing that has done the most damage. The crown stole Simon's time. The Mushroom War stole humanity's time. The vampires Marceline killed in the Stakes miniseries had taken her childhood. Even Jake, the most carefree character on the show, is constrained by time, because his species, whatever Jake is, lives a shorter life than his human brother, and the audience knows this without having to be told. The original series gestures at all of these temporal pressures, sometimes directly, often obliquely. The show treats time the way it treats grief, as a thing that is always present in the room, and rarely the official subject of conversation. Distant Lands picks up that thread and stops pretending. Distant Lands is, on every level, a show about what time has done. BMO is set far enough in the future that nobody in the original cast, except BMO, is even visible. The very first beat of the project is the audience being told, structurally, that enough time has passed that the original cast has receded. Obsidian is a few years after the finale, but the entire emotional architecture of the special is built on flashbacks to a much older time, the era when Marceline and Princess Bubblegum first knew each other. The audience is asked to hold the past and the present in the same frame, and to notice the gap between them. Together Again is set after the deaths of its protagonists, which is to say, after the protagonists have run out of time entirely. The whole special is about what it means to be on the other side of time, looking back. Wizard City is set in a time when Simon has been restored, which means a time when one of the show's longest-running tragedies has finally been undone, and the special asks what comes after the undoing. Each of the 4 specials sits at a different relationship to time, and together they form a map of the show's temporal imagination. There is the long future, the lived present, the post-mortal afterward, and the convalescent present. The show is using the 4 specials to look at how its world ages, and the answer it gives across all 4 is that aging is not the enemy. Aging is the medium. Time is what life happens inside. The bonds the show cares about, the bonds between Finn and Jake, between Marceline and Princess Bubblegum, between Simon and Peppermint Butler, between BMO and any creature BMO chooses to love, are the bonds that find ways to survive time. They survive different amounts of time in different ways. Finn and Jake survive death itself. Marceline and Princess Bubblegum survive a centuries-long absence. BMO survives the loss of an entire planet of friends. Simon survives the loss of decades of his own life. Each survival looks different. Each survival is partial. None of them is unscathed. But each of them, in its own form, is a survival, and that is the show's most patient claim. The claim is that time damages everything, but does not destroy everything. The claim is that some bonds are durable enough to persist through any amount of damage. The claim is that the willingness to keep showing up is the thing that holds the line against the entropy. None of those claims is shouted. The show is too patient to shout. The show lays them out in 4 specials across 16 months of release schedule, and trusts the audience to assemble them into a single thesis if the audience is paying attention. That is what these claims look like once they are assembled. Time is the antagonist. The bonds are the resistance. The show is telling you, finally, what it has been telling you all along. There is a related observation that requires unpacking, although it sits a little below the surface of the 4 specials. The observation is about the unequal mortality of the cast. Some characters in Adventure Time are functionally immortal. Princess Bubblegum is, by all available evidence, going to outlive almost everyone she has ever loved. Marceline is the same. Simon, after his restoration, is back to being mortal, but the time he lost as Ice King means his subjective experience of time is unusual. BMO is a machine, and may, on certain readings, be effectively timeless. Finn and Jake are mortal in the conventional sense. The original series did not spend a lot of time directly addressing this asymmetry, although it gestured at it occasionally in episodes that hinted at how much of an outsider Princess Bubblegum was within her own ageless perspective. Distant Lands stops gesturing and starts addressing. The asymmetry is the engine of multiple plot lines across the 4 specials. Together Again is, in part, about what it means for 2 mortals to die while their friends, who happen to be near immortal, will not for a very long time follow them. Princess Bubblegum is not in Together Again, except as a small mention. Marceline is not in it. The reason, structurally, is that those 2 are still alive in the time frame of the special. They will mourn Finn and Jake. They will not be in the dead worlds with them. The special does not need to dramatize their grief for the audience to know it is happening somewhere off screen. The special trusts the audience to imagine it, and once the audience does imagine it, the asymmetry hits. Princess Bubblegum has buried Finn. Marceline has buried Jake. Both of them are still alive when the special ends. The 2 of them, at some point in the implied future, will have to find a way to keep going after losing 2 of the people they have loved longest. The show does not show the funerals. The show does not show the grief. The show simply implies it, and the implication is, on reflection, devastating. Obsidian, conversely, is the special about the immortal characters reckoning with the slow internal damage of their own long lifespans. The flashbacks in Obsidian only make sense if you take the long view, the view in which Marceline and Princess Bubblegum have decades of unfinished business between them. That is a kind of mortality of its own. Even immortals, the show suggests, can run out of patience for each other. They can lose each other for very long stretches of time. They can become unrecognizable to themselves over centuries of accumulating choices. The fact that they find each other again, repair what they broke, and choose to live together is the resolution. But the show does not pretend the resolution was easy or guaranteed. Eternity is its own kind of tax. The asymmetry between mortal and immortal in Distant Lands is one of the lenses the show uses to examine the cost of love. Love between equals is one thing. Love across an asymmetry of lifespans is something else. And the show is brave enough to look at both kinds in different specials and to refuse to pretend that either kind is simple. Finn and Jake were equals in their mortality. Marceline and Princess Bubblegum are equals in their immortality. Simon, post-restoration, has to figure out what kind of life is even possible after losing decades of it. BMO, being a machine, is in some ways the freest of all, because BMO is not bound by the same temporal logic as anyone else and can simply choose to keep going. The show is using the specials to map out a quiet taxonomy of how characters can relate to time, and the taxonomy is honest about how different the experiences are. It does not flatten them, it honors the specificity of each. That again is part of why the project as a whole feels so adult. Most franchise revivals soften the differences between characters in the service of nostalgia. Distant Lands sharpens the differences. The specials are tonally distinct because the lives are tonally distinct. The lives are tonally distinct because the characters experience time differently, and the show is not going to pretend otherwise. To return to BMO with the longer view in mind, it is worth pausing on what makes BMO, the special, structurally unlike anything else in the Adventure Time corpus. The special, on rewatch, reveals itself as a small science fiction parable wearing the clothing of a children's adventure cartoon, and the doubleness of that disguise is part of why it works so well. There is the surface text, in which a small machine helps a young rabbit find her mother and stops a corrupt regent from tearing apart an orbital station. And then there is the subtext, which is doing something stranger. The subtext is that BMO, alone among the cast, is the character whose ethics have always been complete. Most of the original cast had to grow into their values across 10 seasons. Finn had to learn what kind of hero he wanted to be. Jake had to learn what kind of father and brother and friend he wanted to be. Princess Bubblegum had to learn that ruling and controlling are different things. Marceline had to learn that her past did not have to define her future. The show, across 283 episodes, was largely a long character school for its principal cast, a place where every member of the central group was given the time and the failure and the small humiliations they needed in order to grow up. BMO was never in that school. BMO was, from the first episode in which BMO appeared, already the person BMO was going to be. BMO was already kind. BMO was already curious. BMO was already willing to be, on any given afternoon, a baby, a detective, a singer, a chef, a knight, or a tiny, brave companion. The original series treated this completeness as a recurring source of comedy. BMO would announce a new identity. The other characters would react. The episode would, more or less, unfold around the consequences of BMO's whim. It was funny because it was unmotivated. It was unmotivated because BMO did not need motivation. BMO simply was whatever BMO was today. In BMO, the special, that completeness is not a joke anymore. It is the engine of the entire plot. The special drops BMO into a universe in which the rules BMO grew up with do not apply, because BMO did not really grow up with rules in the first place. The Drift Station has its own monarchy, its own protocols, its own scheduled extinctions, and BMO, arriving without context, simply ignores all of it. BMO does not understand that the station is dying because the station has been telling itself for so long that it cannot be saved. BMO does not understand because BMO does not believe it. BMO believes that things can be fixed because BMO is, in some essential way, a being made of belief. The station, on contact with BMO, has to absorb a new piece of information. The information is that the situation is not actually as fixed as the station had assumed. There is a way out. There is a child who can be helped. There is a friend who will stand next to you while you work. That information, delivered through BMO's behavior rather than through any speech, is what allows Y5 to move. Y5 is the secondary protagonist of the special, and her arc is, on close inspection, the actual emotional spine of the runtime. Y5 has lived her whole life on the dying station. Y5 has not seen her mother in long enough that she has begun to assume the absence is permanent. E5 is at the age where a child either learns that the world is a place where things can be looked for and found, or learns that the world is a place where things, once lost, are simply gone. Most of the shows that run alongside Adventure Time on cable would have given Y5 a triumphant moment at the end, where she saves the day herself. BMO does not do that. BMO lets Y5 be saved. The special is the Rare Children's special that depicts a child being helped and treats that as the point. The adult here, the one with the resources, the imagination, the willingness to be patient, is BMO. BMO is the adult. That is a strange claim to make about a small green gaming console, but the special makes it cleanly. BMO carries the story because BMO is willing to pay attention to a child who is suffering. The show is making a quiet assertion about who counts as a grown-up. A grown-up, by the show's lights, is anyone who is willing to keep showing up for a person who is younger and more lost than they are. BMO qualifies. BMO has been qualifying since the original series. The special simply gives that quality the runtime it needs to be visible. The villain of the special, Hugo, is also a craft choice that rewards a closer look. Hugo is large. Hugo is calm. Hugo speaks in a low, considered register that makes it easy to miss, on first viewing, just how much malice is sitting underneath the courteous surface. The show has always been good at this kind of villain, the polite menace, the antagonist, whose calm is the threat. The Lich is a polite menace. The Vampire King had a kind of polite menace. The original series occasionally tipped into more theatrical villains, but the ones that lasted, the ones the audience remembers, were the ones whose threat was disguised as composure. Hugo extends that lineage into space. Hugo is not screaming. Hugo is not raging. Hugo is, in his own framing, simply administering a dying station and doing what is necessary to extract value from it before the lights go out. The special does not present Hugo as misunderstood. Hugo is not given a redemptive backstory. Hugo is, in the end, defeated, and the defeat is staged with the kind of low-key competence that Adventure Time sometimes uses for its boss fights. There are no fireworks, there is no triumphant musical sting. BMO simply outlasts Hugo, the way BMO outlasts most of what BMO encounters, and the regime collapses under its own weight. The show is making a small point about how regimes like Hugo's actually fail. They do not always fail because of a heroic blow. They fail because someone shows up and refuses to play along. BMO refuses to play along. The whole apparatus comes apart around that refusal. That is, in a quiet way, a political reading of the special, although the show never frames it that way. The show frames it as BMO being BMO, but the political subtext is there for anyone who wants to see it. The closing minutes of BMO are some of the most underrated work in the entire Distant Lands project. The crisis has resolved. The station is, more or less, going to be okay. Y5 has been reunited with her mother, and BMO, having done the thing BMO came to do, prepares to go. The special does not give BMO a triumphant exit. The special gives BMO a quiet wave goodbye. Y5 watches BMO leave. The camera holds on her face. The show does not need to add a voiceover explaining what she is feeling. She is a child whose hero is leaving, and the show trusts the audience to understand what that looks like. The cosmic vastness reasserts itself. BMO becomes a small dot. The station continues to orbit. Life on the station, after BMO, is not a finale, it is just the next day. That ending tone, the refusal to stage the departure as the end of anything, is the special's quiet, final argument. BMO does not need to be remembered. BMO does not need a statue. BMO came. BMO did what BMO does, and BMO is going somewhere else, somewhere the camera will not follow. BMO will do this again. The special is making a claim about what it means to be a good force in a universe. A good force does not require continuous credit. A good force keeps moving. BMO is moving. The audience is left with the implied confidence that wherever BMO goes next, the next station will be a little better for the visit. That is the most generous possible conception of heroism. BMO embodies it, the special honors it, and by leading the Distant Lands project with this quiet assertion, the show sets the tone for everything that follows. The universe is not running out of helpers. The universe just has to be willing to let the helpers in. There is a final thing to say about BMO before moving on, which is about the gentleness of the ending. The special could have ended on cosmic awe, on a wide vista of stars, on a swelling chord. Instead, the special ends on a small, almost domestic image, BMO in a small ship, alone, humming. BMO hums. The hum carries. The audience is allowed to hear it for a few seconds before the credits roll. That hum is, in some ways, the most concentrated expression of the special's whole argument. The hum is what BMO does when BMO is simply content. BMO hums while doing chores. BMO hums while waiting. BMO hums while alone in space. The hum is BMO's way of telling the universe that BMO is still here. The audience, having spent 45 minutes with this small machine, understands the hum. The hum is, in a way, BMO's signature. To end the special on the hum is to end the special on the simplest possible affirmation. BMO is alive. BMO is well. BMO is content. And somewhere, in some other corner of the cosmos, there will be another small creature in another dying place who will hear that hum and discover that things might still be okay. That is not a small ending. That is an ending that earns the right to be small. To return to Obsidian with the longer view in mind, what becomes visible on a second or third watch is the special's careful attention to the structure of long-term love. The original series, when it dealt with romance at all, dealt mostly with the architecture of attraction. Who likes whom? Who is brave enough to say it? Who is going to be hurt by it? That is the architecture most cartoons stay inside. And Adventure Time, in its early seasons, mostly stayed there too. Obsidian leaves that architecture behind almost immediately. The romance is settled. The attraction is no longer the question. The question in Obsidian is what happens after the architecture is built, after the partners have moved in together, after the courtship has ended and the daily life has begun. That question turns out to be more interesting than the question of whether two people will get together, and the special is structurally designed to demonstrate why. Marceline and Princess Bubblegum, in the present-day scenes of Obsidian, are not in any kind of acute relational crisis. They are not on the verge of breaking up. They are not deciding whether to commit. They have committed. The question of whether they would commit was, in some sense, answered in the final scene of Come Along With Me. Obsidian is therefore free to ask harder questions. Obsidian asks what the long history of 2 centuries-old beings looks like when it is finally examined in detail by the 2 beings who lived through it. Obsidian asks what it costs to be in love with someone who knew you before you became the version of yourself you are now. Obsidian asks whether it is possible to be loved by someone who has seen you at your worst and chosen to stay anyway. The flashback structure of the special is the technical machinery that allows these questions to be asked. The show alternates between the present-day journey to the Glass Kingdom and a series of flashbacks to an earlier era in which Marceline and Princess Bubblegum first encountered each other, fell into something romantic, made the small daily compromises that the early phase of any relationship requires, and then slowly broke each other's hearts. The flashbacks are not staged as nostalgic. The flashbacks are staged with a slight harshness, an honesty about how the early romance actually went. There were small disappointments. There were arguments about priorities. There was Princess Bubblegum's tendency, even then, to want to manage everything, including Marceline. And there was Marceline's tendency, even then, to retreat the moment she felt managed. Those 2 tendencies, the show suggests, are what eventually broke them apart the first time. Princess Bubblegum could not stop herself from controlling. Marceline could not stop herself from running. And the run eventually turned into a long absence. The show does not assign blame. The show is too careful for that. The show shows you both of them being imperfect, both of them being recognizable, both of them being the kind of people who could plausibly love each other and still drift away. That is, on its own, a more grown-up depiction of failure than most television relationships ever get. Most television relationships fail because of an event. Someone cheats, someone moves, someone dies. Marceline and Princess Bubblegum failed the first time because of who they were. There was no event. There was just the slow accumulation of small miscalibrations until the relationship became unsustainable, and one of them, almost without noticing, was gone. The Glass Kingdom is the visible monument to that failure. The Glass Kingdom is a place Marceline helped found in the era of the early romance, and a place that Marceline left behind when the relationship collapsed. Marceline returning to the Glass Kingdom is, structurally, Marceline returning to the scene of the loss. The show is not coy about this. The Glass Kingdom is full of objects that resonate with the earlier era, songs that were written then, materials that were chosen then, architectural decisions that were made then. Marceline walks through it, and the past is everywhere. The audience walks through it with her, and the past becomes legible. The audience, by the time the climax arrives, has internalized the history. The audience knows what is at stake when Marceline picks up the unfinished song. The audience knows what it means for Princess Bubblegum to hear the lyrics. None of this would land if the special had not done the patient work of building the flashbacks first. The flashbacks are not exposition. The flashbacks are emotional foundation. The audience is being trained through the flashbacks to read the present-day scenes accurately. The present-day scenes are, in a sense, lit from behind by the flashbacks. Without the flashbacks, the present-day scenes would just be two adults in a rocky kingdom doing a quest. With the flashbacks, the present-day scenes become a long act of relational repair carried out under the surface of the quest. That doubleness is the special's signature. The song Monster, when it finally arrives, lands so hard because of all of that prior work. Marceline is not just singing about herself. Marceline is singing about a self the audience has already met, has already watched, has already seen at a younger age in the flashbacks. The audience knows what the Dragon Song was. The audience knows what kind of person wrote it. The audience knows what kind of person Marceline thought she was when she wrote it. So when Marceline, in the present, stands in front of Princess Bubblegum and admits that she has spent a long time afraid that she actually was the monster the Dragon Song was about, the audience hears every flashback at once, every small miscalibration, every moment of withdrawal, every time the younger Marceline could not stay in a room because the room felt like too much. The performance of Monster is technically a single song, and structurally a deep, emotional summary of 2 centuries of accumulated self-suspicion. Marceline is not just admitting to a fear. Marceline is admitting to the fear that has shaped most of her relational behavior. And Princess Bubblegum, hearing this, has a choice. The show stages the choice with extraordinary patience. Princess Bubblegum could deny the fear. Princess Bubblegum could comfort it away. Princess Bubblegum could tell Marceline that the fear is silly. None of those are the right move, and the show knows it. What Princess Bubblegum does, instead, is hear the fear and stay. That staying is the answer the special has been building toward. The special is not arguing that Marceline is not a monster. The special is arguing that Marceline being afraid she is a monster is something Princess Bubblegum can sit next to indefinitely without flinching. That is the form of love the special wants to depict, not the love that fixes, the love that stays. The closing song, sung back from Princess Bubblegum's side of the relationship, is the structural mirror of Monster. If Monster is Marceline's confession, the closing song is Princess Bubblegum's commitment. Princess Bubblegum, who in the original series was always so guarded, always so productively armored, sings, in plain language, what she is willing to keep doing. She is willing to wake up next to Marceline. She is willing to keep choosing this. She is willing to be present for the work. The song is not flashy. The lyrics are, in places, almost prosaic. That is the point. The show is staging a love that does not require ornamentation. The show is letting 2 characters, who have spent centuries adorning their inner lives with elaborate defenses, finally speak in a register that is plain. That register, the register of the unadorned commitment, is the one the special believes in. Everything else, all the songs and quests and dragons and glass kingdoms, has been preparation for that register. The special earns the plainness. It is not a weakness of the writing that the closing lyrics are simple. It is the entire arc of the special pulled to a single point. The implication of all this, when the special ends, is that the relationship between Marceline and Princess Bubblegum is now, in a deep sense, durable, not invulnerable, The show is not stupid enough to claim invulnerability, but durable in the specific sense that the worst confessions have been heard and survived. There is no longer a hidden room in either of them, where the other has not been allowed to look. The hidden rooms have been opened, the fears have been spoken, the history has been put on the table. From here, whatever comes with both of them seeing each other clearly. That is the form of long-term love the special wants the audience to take home. It is not romantic in the giddy sense. It is not romantic in the storybook sense. It is romantic in a sense the audience is not used to seeing in animated television, which is the sense in which two adults have done the unglamorous work of becoming legible to each other. The Glass Kingdom, by the end of the special, is no longer just a monument to failure. It is also, now, a monument to repair. The same place that held the earlier loss holds the present-day reconciliation. The same songs that were written in pain are sung in healing. The continuity of place, of objects, of melody is the special's argument that nothing in a relationship is wasted. Even the worst of it can be returned to and reread. That is a generous claim. Obsidian makes it earn its keep. There is one further observation about Obsidian that is worth surfacing, although it sits a little to the side of the love story. The observation is about the show's depiction of immortality. Most fantasy stories that include immortal characters treat immortality as a kind of mood, a melancholy hovering around the eternal being. The immortal sighs. The immortal looks at the mortal with a sad smile. The immortal is somehow above the proceedings, untouched by the small frictions of regular life. Adventure Time, in Obsidian, refuses that mood entirely. Marceline and Princess Bubblegum are immortal, or close enough that the difference is academic, and the special depicts their immortality as something they have to actively manage rather than as a passive condition. They have feelings about the long time scale of their lives. Marceline is exhausted by her own history. Princess Bubblegum is perpetually inconvenienced by the fact that she remembers more than anyone she works with. The immortality is not glamorous. The immortality is, in some ways, the source of the relational damage between them. They have had so much time to make so many mistakes that the mistakes have accumulated to a depth that ordinary relationships never have to deal with. The flashbacks are, in this reading, a depiction of the specific cost of immortality. Two beings with this much time on their hands have had time to hurt each other in ways that mortals never get the chance to. The repair, in turn, has to be commensurate. They cannot fix in one conversation what they spent decades breaking. The special does not pretend they can. The special depicts them in the early stages of a long, ongoing repair, one that they will probably still be in for as long as either of them exists. That is, in the show's vision, what immortal love actually looks like. It is not a state, it is a practice, and the practice has no end. They are not going to be done with each other. They are going to keep doing this forever. The special makes that prospect feel less like a curse and more like a shared inheritance. The eternity is the medium. The repair is the work. The love is the choice that gets made. Again, every time the medium presents an opportunity for the work. To return to Together Again with the longer view in mind, the special demands a closer look at how it stages the encounter with the Lich, because that encounter is doing more thematic work than any single confrontation in the original series ever did. The Lich, across the original 10 seasons, was the show's most reliable ultimate threat, the entity that represented the death of all life, the impulse to undo. The Lich appeared in different bodies, in different shapes, in different decades of the in-world timeline. The Lich was defeated, repeatedly, and the Lich kept coming back, repeatedly, because the show always understood that the Lich was less a character than a permanent feature of the universe. There is, in any sufficiently complex world, a force that wants there to be nothing. The Lich was that force, given a form. Together Again, in revealing that the seemingly bureaucratic and reasonable new death is, in fact, the Lich wearing the office of the afterlife as a costume, makes one of the show's most ambitious thematic moves. The move is to suggest that the impulse the Lich represents is not only present in the worlds of the living, the impulse is present everywhere, including in the structures that organize the dead. The Lich has, in this special, found a way to install itself inside the very institution that processes mortal endings. Death itself, as a function, is now contaminated by the thing that wants there to be nothing. That is a terrifying premise, and the show does not run from it. The show stages the reveal with the kind of theatrical patience that allows the audience to feel, slowly, the wrongness of the room. Finn and Jake do not initially register that anything is off. New Death is gracious. New Death offers the kind of tidy explanation that bureaucracies always offer to people who have just been processed by them. There is a cycle, there is a system, there are roles, everything is being managed. The audience, watching, can almost believe it. The show takes its time before tipping its hand, and when the tip comes, when the Lich's presence behind the office becomes visible, the wrongness retroactively colours every prior moment of the encounter. The audience realises, in the same beat as Finn and Jake, that the institution they have been speaking with is hollowed out. The thing they thought was administering the afterlife has been replaced by something that wants the afterlife to be a static prison. The static peace New Death has offered is not a peace. It is a slow erasure. And the choice Finn and Jake make in response, the choice to refuse the static peace, is therefore not just a personal choice about wanting to keep adventuring. It is a moral and metaphysical choice. They are refusing the Lich's offer. They are saying, in effect, that they would rather lose themselves to reincarnation, lose their memories, start over as new beings, than accept the Lich's version of stasis, dressed up as rest. The audacity of that choice, on close examination, is the heart of the special. Most stories about the afterlife frame rest as the goal. The dead want rest. The dead deserve rest. Heaven, in most renderings, is a place of permanent, peaceful repose. Adventure Time, in Together Again, declines that framing. The show argues, through Finn and Jake, that the kind of rest that means standing still forever is not actually rest. It is just a long, polite kind of nothing. And nothing, the show has been telling you for 10 seasons, is what the Lich wants. To accept the static afterlife is to give the Lich what the Lich has always wanted. So Finn and Jake, in the most quietly heroic moment in either of their long histories, refuse. They reject the offer. They choose instead to be reborn, knowing that rebirth means losing the lives they remember, losing each other in any conscious sense, until and unless they find each other in some new shape. That is a hard choice. The show stages it as inevitable, but the inevitability is not because the choice is easy. The inevitability is because of who Finn and Jake are. They have, across 283 episodes, plus this special, become beings whose whole identity is built around the willingness to keep moving. They cannot stop moving. They were never going to stop moving. The Lich's offer is, on a deep level, an offer to stop being themselves. They decline. The mechanics of how the Lich is defeated, or more accurately repulsed, in the special, are also worth attention. There is no climactic blow. There is no clever weapon. The Lich is not destroyed in the third act of Together Again. The Lich is, at most, denied. The bond between Finn and Jake, and the bonds these two have with the other dead souls who join them in the climactic sequence, generate a kind of resistant light that pushes the Lich back into wherever the Lich came from. But the show is not subtle about the fact that the Lich is not gone. The Lich, in this universe, is never gone. The Lich is the inverse of life, and as long as there is life, there will be its inverse, looking for cracks to enter through. What the special demonstrates is that the cracks can be patched. Not permanently, but patched, here and now, by the people who refuse to let them open further. That is a more honest cosmology than most heroic fiction allows itself. There is no final victory. There is only the continuous local victory of refusing, today, to let the dark thing in. Finn and Jake, in the climactic confrontation, are not winning a war. They are holding the line. The show makes that distinction clear, and the distinction is, in retrospect, what the Lich has meant in this universe. all along. The Lich was never going to be defeated forever. The original series sometimes flirted with the idea, but the better instinct, the truer instinct, was always that the Lich was a permanent feature, and that the meaningful question was how the living, and now the dead, would relate to that permanence. Together, again, answers the question for the dead. The dead refuse. The refusal is enough. The dead worlds themselves, beyond the central Lich confrontation, deserve a closer look as a piece of world building. The original series gestured at the Adventure Time afterlife in fragments. There were episodes that touched on it. There were brief visits. There was, in particular, the episode in which Jake, briefly, dies and is shown a layered system of post-mortal realms before returning. But the original series never sustained an entire runtime inside the afterlife. Together, again, is the first time the show commits to depicting the system in detail, and the detail is rich. The dead worlds, as the special depicts them, are layered, plural, and aesthetically distinct. There is no single afterlife. There are multiple post-mortal realms, each with its own logic and atmosphere. The show resists the temptation to give them tidy names that would make them easy for fans to map. The show keeps the cosmology slightly vague. The vagueness is, again, a craft choice. The show is not building a wiki article. The show is building a feeling. The feeling is that the afterlife is too large to be fully described, that any one mortal traveller will only see a subset of it, that the right register for it is awe rather than catalogue. Finn and Jake, travelling through several of these realms, function as the audience's eyes. They notice, occasionally, that the rules are different here. They adapt, they keep moving. The realms blur into each other in a way that mirrors the actual experience of grief, in which the bereaved often describe time itself becoming strange. The show is, intentionally or not, depicting a structure of the afterlife that mirrors the structure of mourning. The dead pass through stages, not as a tidy sequence, but as a wash of overlapping conditions, and the special trusts the audience to feel the structure rather than to chart it. The decision to populate some of the dead worlds with characters from the original series, but not too many, is one of the most carefully calibrated choices in the special. There are appearances, there are old faces, there are nods, but the special does not turn the afterlife into a fan service buffet. The cameos that exist are earned. They are placed where they support the emotional logic of the moment, not where they would simply trigger recognition. That restraint is rare in franchise revivals, where the temptation to bring everyone back, to give every fan their favourite character a final beat, is almost overwhelming. Together again resists that temptation. The afterlife in this special is not a high school reunion. It is a vast and slightly lonely place, where Finn and Jake encounter mostly strangers and only occasionally an old friend. That loneliness is, in itself, part of the point. Death is not a party. Death is, in the show's vision, mostly a quiet wandering through a long landscape, with occasional unexpected meetings, and the meetings are rendered more meaningful by their rarity. The audience, watching, learns to feel each cameo as an event rather than an entitlement. The show is not handing the audience anything. The show is letting the audience earn the encounters by sitting through the long stretches of unfamiliar terrain. The porch scene at the end, the moment with Finn and Jake watching a sunset together in an idealized version of the tree fort, deserves a final and longer pass, because the scene is, in its quiet way, the most concentrated thesis statement in the entire Distant Lands project. The setting is significant. The porch is a recreation of the tree fort, but not exactly the tree fort the audience remembers. It is the tree fort filtered through some version of memory or imagination, the way places appear to us in dreams when we dream about places we have lost. The porch is a dream porch. The sunset is a dream sunset. The two of them, sitting there, are themselves not quite the bodies they had in life. The whole image is doubled, present and remembered at once, and the doubling is part of why the scene lands so hard. The audience is being shown an idealization, a memory, a place that is also a feeling, and in that doubled space, two old friends are sitting together, doing nothing, watching light fade. The show holds on the image. The show holds on it longer than commercial pacing recommends. The show does this because the show knows the audience needs the time. The audience has been with Finn and Jake for over a decade. The audience has watched them as boys, as adolescents, as adults, as old men, as the dead. The audience has accumulated, across all of that watching, a relationship with the friendship that the show is depicting. The porch scene is the show giving the audience the time to settle into that accumulated relationship one last time before the special ends. The silence in that scene is not empty. The silence is full. Every silence Finn and Jake have ever shared in the original series is somewhere in that silence. Every quiet ride, every pause between jokes, every moment in which the show let them simply exist together without needing to fill the air. The audience hears all of those silences at once, layered into this one. That layering is what gives the scene its weight. The show has, by this point, taught the audience how to hear a silence between these two. The audience hears it, and then the audience watches them dissolve into the next thing. To return to Wizard City with the longer view in mind, the special's quiet comedic register turns out, on closer inspection, to be one of its most deliberate craft choices. After the cosmic vastness of BMO, the centuries' deep relational repair of Obsidian, and the metaphysical heft of Together Again, the audience arrives at Wizard City and finds itself, almost against expectation, in a school comedy. There are jokes, there are pratfalls, there are awkward roommate dynamics, there are bumbling teachers. The tone is, by the standards of the prior 3 specials, unmistakably lighter. That lightness is not a failure of ambition. The lightness is a counterweight. The Distant Lands project, taken as a whole, would be unbearable if all 4 specials operated at the emotional intensity of Obsidian and Together Again. The audience needs a place to land. The audience needs a register that says, after all of this, life continues to include its smaller pleasures. Wizard City provides that register. The comedy is the medicine. The school setting is the medicine. The fact that nothing in Wizard City is, on a strict cosmic accounting, all that important is itself the point. Sometimes the right move, after a story has shown you the death of its heroes and the long repair of a centuries-old relationship, is to show you a candy student who is anxious about a magic exam. That deliberate descent in stakes after the climbs of the previous specials is a kind of emotional courtesy. The show is letting the audience exhale. The character work on Peppermint Butler in this special is also more substantial than a quick read suggests. Peppermint Butler, in the original series, was a creature of inflections. He was small, he was polite, he was, occasionally, hinted to be associated with darker forces, in ways the show treated as comic background. The implication, never fully explored in the original series, was that Peppermint Butler had a complicated relationship with magic, with the underworld, with figures and forces that the rest of the Candy Kingdom either did not know about or chose to ignore. Wizard City finally gives that implication a runtime. The special suggests, through its mystery subplot, that Peppermint Butler's history with magic predates his role as a butler, that there are things in his past he has not fully reckoned with, and that Wizard School, of all places, is where the reckoning will happen. The plot thread is handled with restraint. The special does not turn into a dark fantasy treatise. The special keeps the reckoning at the scale of a school year, which is to say, at the scale at which a candy student might plausibly handle it. That scaling is, again, a craft choice. The show is letting Peppermint Butler grow without forcing him into a cosmic confrontation he does not need. The lessons he learns in the special are appropriately small. He learns that his past is not a disqualification from learning new things. He learns that he can be a beginner at something, even though he is, in some ways, also an expert in adjacent things. He learns to ask for help. He learns to make a friend. None of those lessons are dramatic by the standards of the rest of Distant Lands. All of them are, on a human scale, real. Simon, in his role as a teacher in Wizard City, is doing some of the most important quiet work in the entire Distant Lands project. The fact that Simon is a teacher, specifically, is the special's deepest claim about who he was always going to be on the other side of the curse. Simon, before the apocalypse, was a scholar of magical artifacts. The original series established this in fragments across multiple seasons, in the flashbacks that showed his pre-apocalypse life as a researcher and an academic. The crown found him in that life. The crown destroyed that life. And what Wizard City reveals is that the life the crown destroyed has, in its essential shape, returned. Simon is a scholar of magical artifacts again. He is at a chalkboard. He has a class. He has notes. He is doing the work he was doing before the world ended. The continuity is not a coincidence. The special is making a quiet argument about identity. The argument is that there are some things about a person that are deep enough to survive even the most thorough erasure. The crown took most of Simon's life. The crown took his memories, his relationships, his sense of himself, his decades. The crown could not take the part of him that was, fundamentally, a teacher of magical history. That part survived. That part was waiting underneath. And once the crown was off, that part was the first thing to reassemble itself. Simon went back to the work because the work was who he was. The show is making, in this image, one of its most generous claims about human identity. The claim is that even the worst kind of damage cannot fully destroy the deep self. The deep self can be obscured for a long time. The deep self can be hidden under layers of curse and confusion. But the deep self does not actually go away. When the conditions allow, the deep self comes back. Simon is the proof. The interactions between Simon and Peppermint Butler, brief as they are in the special, function as a kind of intergenerational handoff. Simon is the older figure who has been through the worst of what the Adventure Time universe can do to a person, and has come out through luck and through the love of others on the other side. Peppermint Butler is the younger figure who has had his own complicated history with magical forces, and is now, finally, getting to be a student rather than a small, weird, slightly threatening side figure in someone else's kingdom. The teacher and the student, the old and the young, the damaged and healed and the inexperienced and becoming. The pairing is so simple that it almost slips past you on first watch. On second watch, it is recognizably the most classical possible image of a school. A teacher who has lived through things passes a small piece of what he learned to a student who is just starting. That image, that primal image of human learning, is the image the show chose to end on. After space and death and centuries of love, the show ends on a teacher and a student. That is a decision worth pausing on. The show is saying, by ending on that image, that the longest project of any civilization, the project that outlasts all the wars and apocalypses and cosmic threats, is the project of one generation telling the next what it knows. Simon is participating in that project. Peppermint Butler is participating in that project. The Wizards classroom is one of probably countless rooms in which that project is happening at any given moment in this universe. The show, by ending there, is saying that the project is ongoing. The world is not finished. The world will keep going, in classrooms, in libraries, in the small daily transmissions from old to young. The way Wizard City handles the reveal that Peppermint Butler has been quietly recognized by Simon, that there is something Simon sees in him that the candy student does not yet see in himself, is also handled with the kind of restraint that the special has earned by that point. The show does not turn the recognition into a big speech. There is no scene in which Simon takes Peppermint Butler aside and explains, in detail, what he sees and why. The recognition is conveyed through small visual choices, through the angle of a glance, through the patience with which Simon listens to a question, through the gentle correction of an answer. The audience, watching, understands that something is happening. The audience understands that Simon is the kind of teacher who pays attention to the students who need attention. The audience understands that Peppermint Butler is being seen by an adult who is not afraid of what he sees. That seeing, that careful, attentive seeing, is its own form of grace. Many students in Peppermint Butler's position never get a teacher like Simon. Many students are processed through schools by adults who never look closely. The special, by depicting a teacher who looks closely, is making a small claim about what good teaching is. Good teaching, by the show's lights, is the willingness to see the student in front of you as more than the problem they are presenting. Simon does that. The special honours it. The closing image of Wizard City, and therefore the closing image of all of Distant Lands, lands with a deceptive lightness. It is a school day. The bells ring, students disperse. Simon erases the chalkboard. Peppermint Butler walks out into a hallway full of other students. The world continues. There is no triumphant flourish. The image is mundane on its surface. Beneath the surface, the image is doing some of the most concentrated thematic work in the entire project. The show is ending, as the show began, with the small, ordinary motion of a life. The bells ring. The hallways fill. Tomorrow, there will be another lesson. The crown is gone. The lich is held back. Marceline and Princess Bubblegum are at home, working. Finn and Jake are reborn, somewhere, finding each other. BMO is in space, humming. And Peppermint Butler is in school, learning. The show is closing on the texture of continuance. That texture, the texture of ordinary days in a world where the cosmic threats have been, for now, held off, is what every other special in distant lands has been protecting. Wizard City reveals what the protection was for. The protection was for the school day. The protection was for the small, ordinary lives that get to happen on the inside of all the heroism. That is the show's final argument, and the argument is delivered, characteristically, without fanfare. Pull back from the 4 specials now and look at them as a single object. What does the object look like, considered as a whole? It looks like an argument. It is not a victory lap. It is not a celebration. It is not a tidy bow on a beloved show. It is a closing argument. The Distant Lands project is, structurally and thematically, the kind of statement a careful writer makes at the end of a long brief. The writer has spent the bulk of the document presenting evidence, building cases, depicting characters in motion, and then, in the closing argument, the writer pulls everything together to demonstrate, one final time, what the case has been about. The 4 specials are that closing argument. Each special, considered alone, can be enjoyed as its own piece. Each special is, on its own, a satisfying watch, but the 4 together make a claim that none of the specials alone could make. The claim, when the 4 specials are placed alongside each other, is that the show was always about the same thing, even when the show seemed to be about many different things. The show was about how time damages people, and how the bonds between people resist that damage. Every other apparent subject of the show, the magic, the cosmology, the apocalypse, the kingdoms, the wars, the dungeons, the songs, was a delivery system for that single claim. The claim is the spine. The 4 specials make the spine visible. Consider the accumulation. BMO depicts a small machine continuing to be itself in a place so far from home that the home no longer matters. The bond BMO carries is BMO's bond with the very idea of love, with the willingness to keep showing up for whoever is in front of BMO at any given moment. Time has erased everyone. BMO once knew, in the sense that the original cast is functionally not present in the special, and yet BMO is unscathed in any deep way. BMO carries the love forward. The bond resists the erasure. Obsidian depicts 2 immortal women working through the kind of damage that only accumulates between people who have had centuries to hurt each other. The bond in their case is something they have had to actively rebuild from the ashes of an earlier failure. Time gave them every opportunity to lose each other for good. The bond, having been chosen and rechosen, has resisted the loss. Together Again depicts two best friends meeting again on the far side of mortality, choosing to refuse a static afterlife and instead committing to be reborn into new lives where they will, eventually, find each other again. The bond, in their case, has had to survive death itself. The bond, the show argues, can survive even that. Wizard City depicts a teacher who lost decades of his life to a curse, returning to the work he was doing before the loss, and a student who has carried complicated baggage finally being seen by an adult who can hold what he sees. The bond, in their case, is the slow work of mentorship, the patient transmission of attention from one generation to the next. Time has tried to erase Simon. The bond between teacher and student, even with this particular damaged teacher and this particular complicated student, resists the erasure. Lay the four side by side. BMO and Y5, Marceline and Princess Bubblegum, Finn and Jake, Simon and Peppermint Butler. Four bonds, four kinds of bond, four different relationships to time. The cumulative effect of placing them next to each other is that the audience finally sees, with full clarity, that all of these are the same project. The bonds look different on the surface because the characters are different. The bonds look different because the circumstances are different. Underneath, the bonds are doing the same work. The work is to hold something stable in a universe that wants to erase it. Time is the universe's preferred method of erasure. The bonds are the answer. The show, by giving each bond its own special, is showing the audience that this particular response to time, the response of choosing to keep loving in the face of erasure, is something that can be done in many different shapes. It can be done by a small machine carrying optimism into deep space. It can be done by two immortals choosing to look at each other plainly after centuries of hiding. It can be done by two best friends agreeing to be reborn together. It can be done by a teacher quietly seeing a student. The shapes are different. The work is the same. That is the synthesis. The four specials are not a sampler platter. The four specials are four iterations of a single demonstration. The demonstration is that the bonds between people are the resistance to time, and that the resistance can take many forms. The show, by spending 16 months of release schedule on this demonstration, is making the case as comprehensively as a children's animated franchise has ever made it. The case is the closing argument. The closing argument is what Distant Lands is. And the closing argument, once you see it as such, recasts the entirety of the original series. The original series, in retrospect, was not building toward a single epic finale. The original series was building toward this. The original series was accumulating, episode by episode, the relational density that the four specials would eventually need to draw on. Every campfire scene between Finn and Jake, every awkward conversation between Marceline and Princess Bubblegum, every flashback to Simon's pre-curse life, every BMO solo number was deposit. The deposits accumulated for 10 seasons. Distant Lands cashed them in. The cash-in was the closing argument. And the closing argument was that the deposits had been the point all along. The show was never about the adventure. The show was always about the relational density that the adventure was a vehicle for. The vehicle ended. The relational density did not. Distant Lands depicts the density operating after the vehicle has stopped moving. The depiction is the proof. There is a small point worth making about the structural decision to release the specials in the order they were released. BMO came first, then Obsidian, then Together Again, then Wizard City. That order is not chronological in the in-world timeline. BMO is set far in the future. Obsidian is set a few years after the finale. Together Again is set after the deaths of Finn and Jake, which is sometime between the present of Obsidian and the future of BMO, although the show does not specify. Wizard City is set in a relatively close present, after Simon's restoration. The release order, then, is roughly future, near present, post-mortal, near present. That is a strange order if you are trying to tell a story chronologically. It is a much better order if you are trying to tell a story rhetorically. The release order is the order of the closing argument. BMO opens by establishing that the show has dissented. There is no Finn anchor anymore. There is no shared place anymore. The world has fanned out. Obsidian then immediately demonstrates that the bonds the original series cared about most, the long romantic bonds between immortal characters, have actually held and are now operating in a more mature form. Together Again raises the stakes by showing that the most central friendship in the original series, the Finn and Jake bond, has held even through death, and that the bond is durable enough to survive reincarnation. Wizard City, finally, lands the argument by showing that the smallest and most ordinary bonds, the bond between a teacher and a student, are part of the same fabric, and that the fabric extends from the cosmic to the everyday without breaking. That release order is, in retrospect, an argument structure. Open with decentralization. Establish that the relational core has held. Raise the stakes to the metaphysical maximum. Land on the everyday. The argument structure is, on its own, beautiful. It is the structure a careful writer would choose, and the show chose it. The synthesis also explains why Distant Lands feels different from most franchise revivals. Most franchise revivals are extensions. They are attempts to keep the franchise alive in some form, to extract more story from a property that has demonstrated audience appeal. Distant Lands is not an extension. Distant Lands is a closing argument made retroactively, after the original case has already been presented. The show ended in 2018. Distant Lands does not pretend to undo the ending. Distant Lands does not try to make the show longer. Distant Lands accepts that the show is over and uses the runtime of the 4 specials to demonstrate in detail what the show was for. That is a fundamentally different posture from the posture of most revivals. Most revivals say, "Here is more of what you loved." Distant Lands says, "Here is what you loved, examined from 4 different angles, so that you understand, finally, what it actually was." The show is not giving the audience more of the same. The show is giving the audience a deeper view of what the same has been. That deeper view is, in retrospect, more generous than more of the same would have been. More of the same would have eventually devalued the original. The deeper view enriches the original. Every episode of the original series, on rewatch, is now subtly different because of Distant Lands. Every campfire is now a small piece of evidence in a case the audience now knows the conclusion of. The closing argument has retroactively made the entire series feel more cohesive than it sometimes did in its monster of the week early seasons. The early seasons, in retrospect, were not random episodes. They were depositing relational density that the closing argument would eventually need. There is a related point, smaller but worth surfacing, about the decision to spend the closing argument on the specific bonds the show chose, rather than on others it could have chosen. The show could have made a special about Finn alone, about his late life accomplishments, about the kingdom he eventually leaves behind. The show could have made a special about Lady Rainicorn and her family, about the ongoing life of Jake's pups. The show could have made a special about the new generation of heroes, about whoever will protect Ooh after Finn is gone. The show did not make any of those specials. The show specifically chose to spend its 4 windows on a small machine, 2 immortal partners, 2 dead best friends, and a side character student under a damaged teacher. That selection is itself a thesis statement. The thesis is that the bonds the show has come to care about most are not the bonds that look most heroic from the outside. They are the bonds that look most ordinary from the outside, even when the characters inside them are extraordinary. A friendship between a small machine and a child rabbit. A long-term relationship between 2 immortals who have learned to stay in the same room when one of them is afraid. 2 old men sitting on a porch. A teacher noticing a student. The selection of bonds, considered as a list, is not a list of the show's most spectacular pairings. It is a list of the show's most quiet pairings. The show, in choosing those pairings for the closing argument, is making a final claim about what kind of love it has been depicting all along. The kind of love the show believes in is the kind of love that is, in its essential mechanics, ordinary. The trappings can be fantastic. The rabbits can be in space. The candy can be in wizard school. The dragons can be in glass kingdoms. Underneath the trappings, the love operates the way ordinary love operates. Patience, attention, the willingness to come back, the willingness to stay. The selection of the 4 bonds is the show telling the audience, one last time, that these are the elements of love it cares about. Everything else, the dragons and the kingdoms and the cosmos, is decoration. That selection also explains why Distant Lands feels emotionally heavier than most of the original series, even though, scene by scene, the action is often less intense. The original series had to compress its emotional content into the rhythms of a half-hour adventure cartoon. There were jokes to make. There were monsters to fight. There was a plot to keep moving. The emotional content had to be slipped in, often in single lines, often in held shots, often in the spaces between episodes. Distant Lands has more time. Each special has roughly 45 minutes of runtime, and the specials are not bound by the structure of an adventure cartoon. The specials can sit in a feeling for as long as the feeling needs. They can let a song play out in full. They can let a silence extend. They can let a flashback unfold without rushing back to the present. That extra time is one of the most important things Distant Lands has, structurally, that the original series did not. The closing argument needed the time. The show would not have been able to make the case in shorter form. The 45-minute special is the unit of length the case requires, and the project allocates 4 of those units, 1 per major bond. That allocation, in retrospect, looks generous. The show is giving each bond as much space as it can fit into the runtime budget, and the show is choosing not to rush. The synthesis also reveals something about what the show declines to do. The show, across the 4 specials, never reunites the original 4-pack of Finn, Jake, Princess Bubblegum, and Marceline in a single scene. There is no special in which the 4 of them sit down together one last time. There is no farewell dinner. There is no group photo. The 4 characters who anchored the original series do not, in Distant Lands, share a final shared frame. That is, considered closely, an extraordinary restraint. Most franchise revivals would have considered the group reunion the centerpiece. Distant Lands declines to make it the centerpiece. Distant Lands does not even include it as an aside. The 4-pack is, in this project, deliberately scattered. Finn and Jake are dead, in together again. Princess Bubblegum and Marceline are alive in Obsidian. The 2 pairs do not share screen time. The decision to keep them apart is a structural commitment to the larger thesis. The thesis is that the world has decentered. The 4-pack does not exist anymore. To stage a reunion would be to lie about the world the show has built. The show refuses to lie. The 4 characters get their bonds depicted, but the bonds are depicted in pairs, not as a quartet. The quartet is gone. The pairs persist. That is the honest depiction. There is a final thing to say in the synthesis, which is about the relationship between Distant Lands and its own audience. The audience of Adventure Time, by the time Distant Lands aired, was an unusual audience. The show had begun as a children's cartoon. The audience had been children. By the time the original series ended in 2018, that audience had largely grown up alongside the show. By the time Distant Lands aired, between 2020 and 2021, the audience was largely young adults. The show, in choosing what to depict in Distant Lands, is choosing for that grown-up audience. The choices are the choices of a show that knows its audience is no longer children. The choices include depictions of long-term romantic partnership, of natural death, of post-mortal cosmology, of the slow work of recovery from trauma, of the complicated dynamics of teacher-student relationships, of the loneliness of cosmic isolation, of the patience required for adult love. None of those subjects are subjects a children's cartoon would normally depict. Distant Lands depicts all of them, and depicts them with a confidence that suggests the show is aware its audience can handle them. That awareness is itself a kind of love. The show, in trusting the audience to handle these subjects, is demonstrating the same kind of attention that BMO gives Y5, that Princess Bubblegum gives Marceline, that Finn and Jake give each other, that Simon gives Peppermint Butler. The show is paying attention to who the audience has become. The audience, in turn, having grown up with the show, recognizes the attention. There is a reciprocity in the relationship between Distant Lands and its viewers that is not fully visible from inside any one special. From inside the 4 special project, the reciprocity is what makes the closing argument actually land. The audience is ready to hear the case. The show is ready to make it, and the case is made. To restate the central thesis in its fullest form then, with all 4 specials behind it. Adventure Time was always a show about time, in a way that the original series only sometimes admitted out loud. Time, in the world of the show, is the antagonist. Time is the thing that does the most damage. Time eroded humanity in the Mushroom War. Time stole Simon Petrikov from himself through the slow work of the Crown. Time gave Marceline and Princess Bubblegum so many opportunities to hurt each other that they almost lost each other for good. Time will eventually take Finn and Jake from the world, and Distant Lands has the courage to depict that taking on screen. Time, in the show's vision, is a continuous pressure. a slow erosion, a quiet enemy that the characters are always, whether they know it or not, fighting. And the resistance to time, the only resistance the show believes in, is the bonds between people. The bonds are the only thing that holds. The bonds resist in different shapes for different characters. The bonds can be the bond between a small machine and a child it just met. The bonds can be the bond between two immortal partners doing the long work of staying. The bonds can be the bond between two best friends who have refused, even in death, to stop choosing each other. The bonds can be the bond between a teacher and a student. The bonds, in all their varieties, are the show's actual subject. Adventure was never the subject. Adventure was the framing device. The framing device gave the bonds something to push against, something to be tested by, something to be measured against. The bonds passed the tests. The bonds are still passing the tests. And Distant Lands is the show's closing argument that the bonds will keep passing the tests in whatever forms they take, in whatever realms the characters end up in, for as long as the characters continue to choose each other. That choice, the choice to keep choosing, is what the show calls love. The show has spent 10 seasons and 4 specials demonstrating what that choice looks like. The demonstration is complete. And so, after all of that, Distant Lands ends not with a flourish, but with an image. The image is, depending on which special you let yourself rest on, one of several. It can be BMO in a small ship, alone in deep space, humming a tune that nobody else will hear. Content. It can be Marceline and Princess Bubblegum in a kitchen they share, doing the small, ordinary work of 2 adults who have chosen each other and will keep choosing. It can be Finn and Jake on a porch in an idealized tree fort, watching a sunset that will not last, not needing to speak. It can be Simon at a chalkboard, his glasses slightly crooked, his notes in front of him, his class half listening, the chalk steady in his hand. The show, by ending on Wizard City, technically lands on the last of those images. Simon at the chalkboard, Peppermint Butler taking notes, the bell about to ring. But the truth is that all 4 images are, in some sense, the show's ending. The show ends in 4 places at once. Each place is small. Each place is recognizable. Each place is the kind of moment that the audience has, by now, learned to read as the actual content of these characters' lives. The cosmic threats are held off, somewhere off screen, by the continued willingness of the bonds to do their work. The bonds are doing their work. The work is quiet. The work is everywhere. And the show, having shown the audience what the work looks like, is willing, finally, to let the camera pull back. The audience holds the rest. The audience knows now what the bonds look like, and what they are for. The show has trusted the audience with that knowledge. The audience carries it. The show fades. The bonds remain. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next.